Whenever you start cutting, it can be tough to know what your calories and macros should be to start getting results. Not only that, but eventually your body will adapt, making the progress stop, meaning you need to make some adjustments to get things going again. So while this video may be a little longer, I'm telling you, make sure you stick around to the end because I'm going to tell you everything you need to know because I want to make this the most complex, helpful guide there is to cutting on YouTube. Alright, so the first thing you need to know to start your cut is what your rough maintenance calories are. I'm hoping you already know this, but if you don't worry, I'm going to take you through how to get this. A lot of people have you look at online calculators to get these rough equations. I'm not personally a big fan of this just because it doesn't take into account things like genetics and your dieting history. Not that you can't use a tool like this, because what's most important is going to be being consistent, seeing how your body responds, and adjusting accordingly. But what I recommend doing if you haven't been tracking is take the next week and just eat exactly the same as you've been doing. Don't change anything about your diet, but now you're actually going to track it. What you'll do here is take those 7 days, add up your total calories, divide it by 7, and now you have your average calories for the week. And if you're maintaining your weight right now, you can reasonably assume this is roughly your maintenance calories. If you're gaining or losing, you can use the rough 3,500 calories is 1 pound of fat equation. Granted, the body is dynamic and it's not quite as simple as just doing a simple math equation like this, but it's gonna give you a good enough starting point. Say for instance, you're gaining around a pound a week. We know 7 times 500 would be 3,500. So if you took away 500 calories daily, that'd be roughly your maintenance calories. If it was a half a pound a week, then you know it's about 250, etc. Now, if you're losing, you just add calories back in instead of subtract. However, if you're losing, now you know you're in a deficit. So as long as it's a reasonable place, that might be a good starting place for your cut. What's a reasonable pace? You want to aim to lose no more than about 1% of your weight on average per week, maybe up to 2% if you're obese. This is how much you can lose without sacrificing extra lean body mass. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, your metabolism will always adapt whatever you do. So if you get too aggressive right away, your body will adapt to lower calories, and then you have less room to make adjustments and you end up getting stuck. Keep in mind, this is an average for the week. Some weeks you're gonna lose more, some weeks you're gonna lose less. I also recommend you weigh yourself daily and take an average for the week because your weight can fluctuate up to several pounds on a daily basis due to water weight, so this will help take away those fluctuations. That said, you don't only want to look at scale weight. Take progress pictures, take measurements, pay attention to how your clothes are fitting and things like that, because sometimes weight will move well and other things won't, and other times things like pictures and measurements will show big changes and weight won't move. So if you're seeing changes anywhere, you're seeing progress. Don't get caught up in just scale weight. Okay, now that you have your maintenance calories, we need to talk about the initial decrease to start your cut. And this part gets messed up a lot, so make sure you pay attention here. You want to make a big enough drop to make sure you elicit a response and get things going, but not so big of a drop that you have to go super low calorie and you tank your metabolism, making it too hard to continue to see results. So even though you do want to eat as many calories as possible while seeing reasonable results, a lot of people will make the mistake of not making a big enough drop in calories and end up basically reverse dieting in reverse, where you kind of just slow your metabolism down, but don't really see much with regards to actual fat loss. So with all that said, what you want to do to start your cut is drop your calories by between about 20 to 30% of your maintenance calories. And yes, I'm definitely going to give you the macro breakdown of this too, but first we need to establish calories before we can get into the macros. So say for instance, your maintenance calories were 2,000. If you took a 20% decrease, then you would take away 400 calories and you would consume 1,600 calories. If you did a 30% decrease, then you're taking away 600 calories and you're eating 1,400 calories. Now, when I say that, a lot of people will panic and say, wow, that's a really big decrease, but don't worry, it's just that initial decrease to get things moving. Your future adjustments won't be that large, but we'll talk about that later. As far as which side of the 20 to 30% you should fall on, it depends on if you prefer a more or less aggressive approach, whether you prefer to eat less calories and do less cardio, or eat more calories and do more cardio, as well as knowing how your body typically responds, because everyone's different. Genetics certainly matter. Keep in mind too, everyone seems to have this certain kind of like threshold of calories that they need to get to in order to start seeing fat loss. So if you don't start seeing results right away, don't panic, just hold off for a couple weeks. If things don't get moving, then you can reduce your calories by another maybe 8 to 10%. and hopefully that'll get things going for you. Now, as far as establishing your starting macro split, while I am going to give you this, first I want to stress, research has been very clear for most people, total calories and protein are what matter most. So if you prefer more fat and less carbs or vice versa, or find your body does better a certain way, that's fine. Anyway, once you have your total calories, you want to start by setting your protein number. And this is because protein is by far the most important macronutrient to hit. There's a few reasons for this. One being protein has by far the highest thermic effect of food, which basically means how many calories your body burns just processing the food you eat. Protein typically burns around 25 to 30% of your calories you eat, whereas carbs is about 5 to 8, and fat is more around 2 to 3%. On top of that, protein is what builds and maintains muscle mass, and the more muscle you have, the faster your metabolism will be, not to mention what it does for your body composition. And thirdly, protein is also the most filling macronutrient, again, by far, as it really helps suppress the hormone ghrelin, which is nicknamed the hunger hormone. So when you eat more protein, it helps you feel fuller, which, as we all know, hunger is an issue when it comes to dieting. So anyway, when you're setting your protein intake, you want to eat between about 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. Or if you're doing kilograms, that'd be about 1.8 to 2.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now, a lot of people will set their macros based on percentages of total calories, but I don't recommend that because you do not want to lower your protein when going through a cutting phase. And if you're taking a certain percent for your protein, when calories come down, so will your protein. Now, once you have your protein set, the next macro you want to set is your fat intake, which you want to eat between about 20 to 30% of your total calories from fat. If you prefer more fat over carbs, aim for the higher side. If you prefer more carbs over fat, aim for the lower side. Then after that, the remainder of your calories are going to come from carbs, but one thing you have to remember is 1 gram of protein has 4 calories, 1 gram of carbs has 4 calories, and 1 gram of fat has 9 calories. Okay, now that we have your macros set to start, we have a couple considerations we need to make. One is if you should incorporate things like refeeds and diet breaks, and the other is how long you should keep writing out these numbers before making adjustments. Let's start with refeeds. First of all, I'm a huge fan of incorporating double refeeds into your plan, which is basically consecutive days of higher calories. There is more and more emerging research showing how this can help keep your metabolism and your hormones in a better place, as well as reduce the amount of lean body mass you lose. Plus, as a coach, it's just something I've noticed over time, it tends to work really well. That being said, I actually don't recommend incorporating refeeds into your cut within the first couple of weeks, unless you find you just cannot adhere to the plan without having a higher day calorie to look forward to. I've just found while they really help with the long-term side of things, it seems like in the first week or two, they can kind of prevent weight loss from happening. After a week or two though, now you can start incorporating refeeds if you want. I used to recommend going from a single refeed and then down the road adding in a double refeed, but now I typically actually recommend just going right to the double refeed approach, mostly because a single day refeed isn't likely to do much for your hormones and your metabolism. It's more just for the mental benefit and replenishing some glycogen storage, which can help with performance, of course. The only time I recommend a single day refeed approach most of the time now is if you just prefer having one day of higher calories that you can really enjoy and it's going to help you stick to the plan and you just prefer that more, then great. That's something we always have to keep in mind. What's optimal is one thing, but what you're going to enjoy and more likely to adhere to is much more important. Anyway, when it comes to setting up your refeed numbers, there's a lot of ways you can do this, but these are some of my kind of general guidelines. And I typically recommend increasing your carbs by about 30 to 60% and also adding in maybe 5 to 10 grams of fat. And I will also sometimes reduce protein by 5 to 10 grams just to allow for a little extra carbs, as carbs are protein sparing, and this can help with things like performance. The other thing to consider when you're going to incorporate a refeed approach is, should you add the refeed days on top of your normal calories, or should you average out the week to be the same? And of course, it depends. Personally, I think if you're losing weight at a pretty fast pace in the beginning stages, especially if you're going well above the 1%, then I would just add in the double refeed on top of what you're already doing, as you're clearly in a good deficit. However, if you're at a more reasonable pace, then most of the time I recommend averaging out the calories for the week and just taking away calories 5 days a week to give them to the 2 days of high calories. Let me show you an example. Say for instance, you were eating 2,200 calories before adding in refeeds. If you took away 100 calories from your low days, that would give you 500 extra calories to spread out between the 2 high days, giving you 2,100 calories 5 days a week and 2,450 calories for the 2 high days, keeping your daily average for the week at 2,200. Keep in mind, this is just one example. There's almost endless possibilities of how you can do this. I also think it's important to mention that while I find that most people tend to do pretty well with their refeed approach, some people don't respond very well. In some cases, people will see a pretty big spike on the scale and they just struggle to get it back off for the rest of the week. Not that a little extra weight gain from a refeed is a terrible thing. Remember, this is mostly going to be things like glycogen and water weight. But if you find you see this spike and struggle to get it off and you keep repeating that pattern, it may not be a great thing for you. Other people, it goes great. Some people even lose weight during the double refeeds. But always remember, it's not about what's happening on those singular days. It's the week by week average. Now, as far as how long to stay with these initial calories, there's a couple ways to look at this. One strategy is just to continue to hold them until your body eventually plateaus and then make your first adjustment. Keep in mind, I don't recommend changing your macros until you haven't seen any results for at least 2 weeks. Again, you're not going to see linear progress. Every single week is not always going to go down. And of course, again, the scale isn't the whole story. Make sure you're looking at everything. I've literally seen people lose 5 inches off the waist without losing a single pound. I've also seen people lose 10, 15 pounds without losing anything from their waist. Anyway, once you've truly plateaued, now you have 2 options. Go ahead and reduce your calories and probably add in a little bit of expenditure as well. Or what I typically recommend the most is to take what's called a diet break first. Diet breaks are essentially like refeeds, except you're doing it for a longer period of time. It's going to be at least a week, if not longer. And I'm telling you, they are an absolute game changer, not just for allowing the process to work better for longer, but to make the process more enjoyable as well. Diet breaks significantly help with getting your hormones back into a better spot, improving your metabolism a little bit. And it does so by minimizing these negative adaptations that are unavoidable from cutting. There's even research that showed that those who took 2-week diet breaks with 2 weeks of deficit in between saw 47% better fat loss while retaining more lean body mass than those who just dieted for 16 weeks straight. Now granted, you have to keep in mind this is a 30-week period versus 16, but they're taking these 16 weeks of actual dieting. And clearly, they help a lot. In fact, you don't even have to wait for a plateau to take a diet break, but I'll touch more on that in a minute. Anyway, what I found from people who take the diet breaks and then come back and adjust, they almost always plow right through that plateau versus when you go right from a plateau and then immediately drop your calories. It's not uncommon for your body to fight that pretty hard. By the way, if you're looking for a more detailed breakdown on how to go through a diet break, I have a link in the description you can check out after this video. But the cliff notes would be, you basically take roughly your refeed numbers and do that for at least a week and hold it. And if you lose weight during the diet break, I recommend taking a second week before returning to your cut. In fact, if you keep losing weight, which is not as uncommon as you might think, I personally recommend just keep riding out until that stops and then come back and make that adjustment. Now, if you roughly maintain or even gain a little bit, like a fraction of a pound, you can still take that second break and I still recommend it, but if you want to go right back to the cut, you can. And I'm going to bring you through exactly how to make these adjustments in a bit. But first, remember how I said you don't have to wait until you hit a plateau to take a diet break? This is because the more often you take them, the better spot you'll stay in metabolically, not to mention help keep the suck of dieting to a minimum. And really, you can take a diet break whenever you want, except I wouldn't recommend taking a diet break within the first week or 2 of starting your cut. But then yeah, after that, whenever you want, but I typically recommend around every 4 to 6 weeks to take a break, even if you're still seeing good results, because worst case scenario, it just helps the process work better for longer, plus help you feel the negative effects of dieting less. Now, what to do after the diet break depends. If you were still losing weight when you took the diet break, then what I would do is after the diet break is done, just go right back to what you're doing pre-diet break. You were already in a deficit, you're now in a better spot than you were before, there's no reason it shouldn't start working again. But if you were plateaued and then took the diet break, then when you come back, I would make your first adjustments. Keeping in mind, when I say adjustments, I mean bringing calories down from the pre-diet break levels. And even if you don't take a diet break, these adjustments would still be the same. What you want to do is drop your calories between about 5 to 15%, as well as probably add in a little of expenditure, maybe another 5 to 10% of your cardio for the week. Now, as far as which macros to take from, typically carbs are going to be the most variable here. So you're probably going to make a bigger change through carbs. However, whatever you prefer is fine. If you prefer to take away more fat, you can. These are pretty interchangeable. Much like in the beginning, which side of the range you go towards mostly depends on how well your body typically responds. This is because some people tend to respond better to smaller changes, other people need larger changes. So the more you know yourself and are honest with yourself, the better. Honestly, I find personally that the majority of people do pretty well with about a 7 or 8% reduction. So using the previous example of someone who's eating 2200 calories and using a double refeed approach, if you dropped 8% of your calories, you would reduce 176 calories from your average daily calories, which you could do a percentage from low and high separately, but I personally prefer to keep calorie drops the same between the high and low day calories. So as you can see in this example, I reduced carbs by 35 and fat by 4 from both high and low days to accomplish this. Again, you can do more or less carbs based on your preference. The one thing I would caution you against though is if you're a male, try to do your best to not go below about 40 to 50 grams of fat, and for females 30 to 40. There can always be some rare instances, but you want to make sure you have enough fat for things like hormones and digestion. And again, you can also add in some extra expenditure too, which will only help, either through things like extra cardio or even just walking in general is very helpful and very underrated when it comes to a fat loss phase. Now, after you make these adjustments, that should get things going again. And much like before, now you're gonna ride these out, maybe take some diet breaks in between. And once things stall out, you make these same types of adjustments, basically repeating the process. Okay, I know this has been a lot. Don't go anywhere yet though. This next part is just as, if not in my opinion, more important than what I've already covered, and that is when to stop dieting and how to proceed after. If you don't do this right, there's a high probability of you just gaining the weight back that you worked so hard to get off, and I don't want that for you. So you want to stop your diet either A, the obvious one, when you've already reached your goal, or B, when your body's just fighting you too hard or you're having a hard time sticking to the plan. This is the part so many people mess up on because they get stubborn and they say, you know what, I want to get to this body weight or this body composition, whatever it may be, and they just feel like they have to get there now no matter what. They're not in it. Their hormones are all jacked up, metabolism is screwed up, but they just keep pushing and it just becomes a disaster. Honestly, not a lot of people get where they want to be in one fat loss attempt, and that's because of how the adaptive the body is. This is just your body doing its job. It's trying to protect you against starvation. So remember, to keep your results, you have to make this a lifestyle, and you can never just be done and go back to the way things were. So if your energy is tanked and you're starving all the time, you're super food focused, can't sleep, you're basically miserable all the time, even if you've been taking diet breaks, then it's time to shift your focus and start a reverse diet to get your hormones and your metabolism back into a better place, and you can come back later to get the rest of the weight off. And this is regardless of if you've met your goal or your body's just fighting you too hard. Unless you want to stay on these crazy low calories forever, you need to work them back up again to not only give your body a break, but to allow some balance and flexibility into your life. Now this video is long enough already, so I'm not going to go into detail on how to reverse diet, but I do have a video in the description you can check out after that gives you all the detail you need. But the moral of the story is you take your time to systematically bring your calories up in a slower fashion so your body and your metabolism has time to adapt to the higher calories while minimizing the chance of gaining extra body fat. Because trust me, if you just say F it and give up altogether, you are going to see rapid fat gain because your metabolism is tanked. And trust me when I tell you, you're going to have to fight even harder next time you come back. So don't let this happen. Now there is something else you need to consider when cutting if you're struggling to lose weight, and it's beyond just calories and exercise. So make sure you check out this top video next, and I'll show you what else you can do to get the results you want. If you found this video helpful, please share it with others so they can get the information too. Would love a thumbs up, and I'll see you at one of those other videos.